What's up, everybody? Chris Pinnell here. We're going my running back tier rankings for week 12 of the fantasy football season. If you enjoy, make sure you leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. Let's dive right into it. And starting us off with the S tier, it's the guy with the reserve spot. And there's only one this week, but it's CMC, Christian McCaffrey. As long as he is healthy, he is going to be up here despite the matchup. He gets too much volume, and he's too talented, and he's in too good of an offense for him not to be here every single week. 25-point implied team total for the 49ers this week on the road in Seattle on Thanksgiving night. 7-point favorites on the road. 83 rushing yards per game, 17 carries, about 5 targets, which equates to a 19% target share, which I know the targets aren't insanely high, but they're only throwing the ball 25 times per game this year, so he is getting a decent target share, especially for being a running back. And it's a great matchup versus Seattle. They're currently 28th versus running backs, meaning they're allowing the 5th most points per game for the position, and they're giving up a lot through the air as well to running backs, which is right up CMC's wheelhouse, so yeah, never a doubt he is number 1 this week. Moving on to the A tier, Jahmyr Gibbs, the rookie. He's been setting the world on fire recently, and with David Montgomery out, he was an absolute stud. With him being back, he is still outsnapping him the previous 2 weeks. Now, Monty's still going to get his. He's going to get some goal line carries, but Gibbs is still getting touches inside the red zone. We did see him get a couple of goal line carries the first week. David Montgomery was back, but this is a great spot versus Green Bay. They're currently 26 versus running backs. And on Thanksgiving afternoon, 27-point implied team total, 7.5-point favorites at home. We get anywhere from 8 to 12 carries from Gibbs and 5+ targets, which is pretty much what he's averaging on the season. I'll be extremely happy with that because he is super efficient with the touches that he receives. And then we have Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and it was a pretty disappointing day if you owned Etienne because the Jaguars put up a ton of points in that one and ended up just not really getting to Etienne whatsoever. Very middling day, but he should bounce back versus Houston. They're below average versus the run this season in terms of fantasy points allowed per game to the position, only allowing 75 rushing yards but 40 receiving yards and still giving up some points to the position, but he gets too much volume for him to be ignored. 18 carries per game and 4 targets. That's elite volume on an offense that should be able to score this week with their 24.5 implied team total. We have Austin Eckler of the Los Angeles Chargers. Don't love the spot overall for Los Angeles this week versus Baltimore. They are playing at home, 21.25 implied team total, but they are 4-point dogs. Decent over-under at 46.5, so there should be points put up in this one. But man, I was watching Austin Eckler on Twitter, and his burst is completely gone. He broke away on the left side of the sideline. It was a straight line run, and he looked like, I don't know, it looked like a really slow bowling ball out there, like Mike Tolbert back in the day from the Panthers, if you remember him. But it was really slow, so he has absolutely zero burst or speed left, which kind of goes in with this 3.6 yards per carry in the season, which is atrocious. But what keeps him fantasy relevant, especially if you're in a PPR league, is that he's going to catch passes. On the season, over 5 targets per game, 40 receiving yards, and a 16% target share. That's enough to be fantasy relevant in an offense that can put up points. Tony Pollard finally got into the end zone for the first time since week 1 last week versus the Carolina Panthers. And once again, he gets an excellent spot here versus the Washington Commanders. Now, they're much worse versus the pass than they are versus the run. They are 17th versus running backs. Another dream scenario here for the Cowboys offense, especially for a running back. 29.5 implied team total, which is the highest of the entire week. 10.5-point favorites. They're at home. He's getting about 20 opportunities each and every single week with involvement in the passing game. Had 5 targets last week. No reason not to like Pollard once again. Now we have Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. They had a bye week last week, but they are back facing Atlanta. Now they have been pretty stiff versus running backs this season. But again, just another guy that gets so much involvement in the passing game. If you are in a PPR league, he has to at least be in the A tier because when you're receiving 8 targets per game in addition to 15 carries, that's way too much volume for a back that has an elite skill set like Alvin Kamara to not ranked in the top 10 no matter what. And leading us off with the B tier, we have Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants, 2 receiving touchdowns last week, which just goes to show how bad that Commanders defense is when Tommy DeVito can even get a couple of touchdowns on them. He's just a safe volume play in a pretty good matchup versus the New England Patriots. Below average defense this season and 18th versus fantasy running backs. We can get 15+ carries and 5+ targets. I'm fine with Saquon Barkley, even though the offense is not really efficient or puts themselves in too many scoring opportunities. And we have Kyron Williams of the Los Angeles Rams. He's making his return this week. They already waived Henderson, so he should be in line for another workhorse role here unless they want to give Royce Freeman carries, which I think would be a mistake. And when Kyron was the main back in this offense, he was pretty good. Nearly at 5 yards per carry at 4.7, 4 targets per game, 16 carries, a rushing touchdown per game, and nearly 80 rushing yards. And the last full game he played was versus Arizona. Absolutely smashed them in the second half after having a very poor performance in the first half just because they didn't get many opportunities. But they're currently allowing the 3rd most points in the running back position, 110 rushing yards per game. And if they're going to be without Cooper Kupp, it's going to be more of a reliance on the run game in this one. 21.5 implied team total on the road in Arizona. But Kyron Williams, definitely a top 10, top 12 running back this week. Then we have DeAndre Swift of the Philadelphia Eagles. Really good game versus the Kansas City Chiefs and found the end zone. The only downside with DeAndre Swift is whenever they get inside the 5-yard line, that's Jalen Hurts time. But if he can get into the end zone, he has that upside. This is a great offense, and it's a pretty good matchup versus Buffalo. They're currently 24th versus running backs, and this game does feature a 48-point over-under, 25.75 implied team total for the Philadelphia Eagles, as they are 3.5-point favorites at home. He's been decently efficient with his touches this season, and he's involved in the passing game, so he's certainly in the RB1 conversation this week. And then we have Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and while I don't think he's super talented or anything, he just gets so many checkdowns in this offense from Baker Mayfield. On the season, he's at 3.3 yards per carry, which is absolutely horrendous, the worst of any running back that we have talked about so far, and probably the worst that we're going to talk about this entire time. But he's getting you 15 carries on the ground, which is not equating to much, 50 rushing yards, 0.3 rushing touchdowns. But what I find the most interesting is this 13% target share, over 4 targets per game, nearly 4 catches. That's going to add up a lot in PPR scoring. Plus, this is a great matchup versus the Indianapolis Colts, who are 26 versus running backs. So Rachaad White, while it might not be pretty, he gets there in PPR scoring. Then we have David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. Definitely a tier below Jahmyr Gibbs because he's not going to be involved in the passing game, but he's going to get some goal line work, and this is a great matchup on the ground versus the Packers, as they are 7.5-point favorites at home on Thanksgiving Day. Over 1 rushing touchdown per game, nearly 5 yards per carry on the season. The only downside is, like I said, no passing game involvement, 5% target share on the season. But if we can get 12 plus carries here and hopefully fall into the end zone, which I think he can versus the Packers, I like him quite a bit. So leading off our C tier, it's a bit of a tricky situation because as of right now, we do not know the situation of Devon Achane, and they play on Friday, so it's a bit of a shorter week here for the Miami Dolphins. So I'm going to put Raheem Mostert in here as of right now. If Achane happens to be out, you can put him right around where Austin Eckler is, in my opinion. I think he has top 5 potential, because if you're going to get 20 plus carries in the Miami Dolphins offense as a running back, which we've seen has been a super valuable position in fantasy football this year, in a plus matchup versus the Jets, you can't throw on them, but you can run a bit. They're currently ranked 23rd versus the position. He had 22 carries last week. It didn't amount to much, but we know Raheem Mostert is an uber efficient running back, 5.6 yards per carry in the season, and one of the most efficient running backs of all time, honestly, if you look at some all-time lists. But on the season, not getting a ton of volume overall, 12 carries per game, but 70 rushing yards, 1.2 rushing touchdowns. I would be very shocked if Achane is out, if Mostert does not fall into the end zone, so he has RB1 potential this week. But keep an eye on the news for Devon Achane. Jonathan Taylor is up next for me, and while I don't love the Colts offense, he is the one guy that you can usually feel pretty confident about that's going to get a lot of volume. Well, I guess him and Michael Pittman. But in the run game, he's pretty much taken away Zach Moss's role completely. We've seen his snaps rise up continually, and then we've seen Zach Moss's snaps go all the way down. It's a tough matchup versus Tampa Bay. They're allowing the second fewest points per game to position, but it's mainly a volume and talent play here. Isaiah Pacheco is up next for me. It's a pretty good spot versus this Raiders run defense, who's currently ranked 25th versus the position, having 111 rushing yards per game. And if you're going to be a running back in a good offense with a 27-point implied team total as a 9.5-point favorite with a little bit of volt in the passing game, and you're probably going to get 15 plus carries, yeah, you're going to be on the verge of RB1 status, if not a high-end RB2. Bijan Robinson, we know the talent is there. The problem is opportunity is not always there for him. For some reason, the Falcons hate him, but he did see a lot of volume last week, so hopefully we can see that going forward. Had over 20 opportunities on the season, just under 5 yards per carry. Tough matchup versus New Orleans, though. If this was a softer matchup, I'd have him higher, but unfortunately that's not the case, and Tyler Algier is not going to completely go away. And then we have Derrick Henry of the Tennessee Titans. I hate this offense. They just cannot put up points, and Henry's been awful the previous 2 weeks, and it was a good matchup versus Jacksonville, but they were just getting blown out, so it's really hard to establish the run at that point. But they are facing Carolina, so this could be the one bright spot for Derrick Henry that we've seen in a long time. He's averaging 16 carries per game, which, you know, we've seen more in the past, obviously. He's breaking down a bit, only 4.2 yards per carry in the season. Not really any involvement in the passing game, but what I do love is the matchup versus the Panthers, allowing the second most points per game in the position, 1.5 rushing touchdowns, 120 rushing yards, and 30.4 points per game in the position, and they let Tony Pollard find the end zone, which is almost an impossible task. And with them being 4-point favorites, as long as it's a positive game script, I like Henry, and if he can get into the end zone, even better. If he doesn't fall into the end zone, though, you're probably going to be stuck with like a max of 10 points. Breece Hall of the New York Jets found the end zone last week versus the Buffalo Bills. He's just one of the more talented running backs in the league at nearly 5 yards per carry. The problem is quarterback play for this offense just hinders scoring opportunities quite often. And they are 9.5-point dogs, and they have Tim Boyle at quarterback versus Miami, 15.5 implied team total. Unfortunately, they're going to be trailing pretty much the majority of this game, but if you can get some dump-offs, you can make up for it in PPR scoring leagues. Javonte Williams, a real downer week versus the Minnesota Vikings, but they've been a little bit tough versus the run this season, but still, I expected a much better game. I think it's another tough spot here versus the Cleveland Browns, but if he's going to see volume that we've seen in recent weeks, besides last week, where Samaje Perine was just going to get a ton of dump-offs, and then we saw McLaughlin involved as well. But if we can get 15 plus touches, he's a talented running back. I know in the season he's been pretty inefficient, but this Broncos team has been playing better football as of late. Josh Jacobs is up next, just a boring volume play. I don't love him versus KC. Their defense has definitely been tough. Give him a pretty good game to DeAndre Swift on Monday Night Football. And only a 17.25 implied team total here. It's just quarterback play is going to be brutal. They're going to be trailing, so we're going to have to rely on dump offs here. And then we have James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals. And while I don't usually view him as a stud or anything, he's at 5.2 yards per carry in the season, which is actually pretty good. They got Kyler Murray back, a 23-point implied team total, 1.5-point spread here. The problem is it's not really involved in the passing game too much this year. I believe he's got a 5% target share on 1.5 targets, so 5 receiving yards per game. But if he can fall into the end zone, which I hate to keep saying, but a lot of these guys are very touchdown reliant. But they're going to get goal line carries. It's not like James Conner is going to get taken off the field. So the opportunity is always there. And it's a decent matchup versus the Rams, as their defense isn't really something I'm too scared of. But versus the run this year, they are allowing the 10th fewest points per game. And moving on to our D tier after a really long C tier. But that always happens to be the case every single week because there's really not much separating these guys outside of the elite talents like CMC, Gibbs, Alvin Kamara. Like those are elite talents. And of course, they're going to be up there despite the matchup. But a lot of it's really just matchup based or opportunity because you can be as talented as you want. But if you're going to get 10 carries a game in a bad matchup, I don't care. You're probably not going to make it too high up in the rankings. And a lot of it just depends on offensive line and how they're used in an offense, really. But let's start off the D tier with Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. Hate both of these teams, the Patriots and the Giants. This game features a 33.5-point over-under, so a real barn burner over there. But they come in as 3.5-point favorites on the road, 18.5 implied team total. And the Giants give up over 110 rushing yards per game, so I'm fine with them. That's about the nicest thing I can say. Devin Singletary, smash bot versus Arizona last week. Loved him. This week versus Jacksonville, while it might seem decent on paper, they're 17th versus running backs. They're only allowing 63 receiving yards per game. But where they do struggle is over 7.5 catches and 50 receiving yards, specifically to running backs. We'll have to see the status of Dameon Pierce throughout the week, but if he happens to be out, I still think Singletary is a fine flex play. And they do have a 23-point implied team total here, so there should be some points put up, although I think that's going to be more so C.D. Stroud in the passing game. Jerome Ford gets the lucky matchup of the Denver Broncos run defense this week. They're still dead last versus the position, allowing 130 rushing yards and a 34.3 points per game to the position. And while him and Kareem Hunt are going to split, I still think Jerome Ford is the main guy you would want in this offense. Joe Mixon's stock definitely takes a hit with no Joe Burrow. And while some people might think, well, maybe they'll run the ball more. Sure, but the efficiency is going to go down. It's not like he's been an efficient running back anyway this season, and teams don't have to respect the pass as much. He's still going to get plenty of volume, but the scoring opportunities are definitely going to be lower. Jalen Warren is apparently the most efficient running back in the league now at this point, 5.1 yards per carry, but I just mean over the past few weeks, and killed the Browns' run defense for an 80-yard touchdown last weekend. But I would say he definitely looks better than Najee Harris, although it's still going to be a bit of a split, but I think Warren's the preferred guy, plus he gets more passing game involvement with his 15% target share on the season so far. And with no Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon does become in play. I think he's absolutely awful. 3.7 yards per carry. I just don't really think there's too many redeeming qualities for A.J. Dillon. But if you're going to get 15 plus touches, you at least have to be in the D tier, I think, in my opinion. And then rolling off to the F tier, we have James Cook. And it's just a brutal matchup versus the Philadelphia Eagles. I think the Bills will be able to pass on them. But versus the run, they're tough. Now, I know Isaiah Pacheco had a pretty good game versus them, but I still have some concerns here. 52 rushing yards per game allowed to the position, 14.1. And we all know Latavius Murray is always going to be lurking in the shadows for goal line touches. Then we have Zach Charbonnet of the Seattle Seahawks. And with no Kenneth Walker, at least in my assumption, that's not official news yet, but I'd be very, very doubtful of him playing on Thursday night in such a quick turnaround with his legit oblique strain. Charbonnet should be the main RB here. 15, 20 touches, I think, is a fair projection. If he's going to get the full-time role, maybe we could limit that to more so like 13 to 16 touches, depending on potential game script here. They are 7.5-point dogs at home, but we do know Charbonnet is going to be involved in the passing game, so if we can get some dump offs versus the 49ers, which is a brutal matchup, I'll still take it. He's a flex-worthy play, but don't think you walked into like a bona fide RB1 stud with Kenneth Walker going out, because the string of matchups for Charbonnet coming up are really, really bad. Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders. If Antonio Gibson happens to be out, you could probably put him up in the D tier this week, maybe even C tier, because we saw some large passing game involvement last week, which was great. But if Antonio Gibson happens to be back, this is actually a pretty good game script for them, as they are 10-point dogs on the road in Dallas with a pretty low implied team total, and the matchup obviously not that great. And then we have the most boring play in the world, Gus Edwards. It's basically touchdown or bust for him, because if he does not get into the end zone, he's not someone that's going to get you 120 yards, 5 catches. So he's really touchdown reliant, but I wouldn't be surprised if he gets into the end zone in this matchup. 25.25 implied team total here for the Baltimore Ravens. 4-point favorites. He's going to be the goal line back. We know that, averaging nearly a rushing touchdown per game this season. Good matchup versus the Chargers, who are currently 28th versus running backs. There's definitely been way worse spots for Gus Edwards this season. And they have Kareem Hunt, who I want to say is the same exact play as Jerome Ford. I would say he's a slight downgrade, which is why I have him in the F tier. But I do think in a very deep league, he is somewhat startable because of the matchup. But with that being said, that's all I got for today's video. So I hope you enjoyed. And if you did, make sure you leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. If you have any questions, leave them down below. I'm more than happy to answer them. But wish you all the best of luck this week and have a great Thanksgiving.